Thank you, Joe. If the prospect for the future, as Donald Hall has just expressed, didn't depress you, I hope that this will depress you even more. Because I believe that a new and important part of our mission as humanists is to disseminate an innovative idea of the praxis of humanism as a practical undertaking. Perhaps never in history have the ideas and ethical standards proposed by humanists been more essential to the well-being of society than in the present. Now that our planet is roasting while we continue to shoot at each other, we as humanists must enter the battlefield in the name of reason, assuming control over those spaces where science has been unable to enter or to improve the prospects for our collective future. Ever since the advent of the scientific revolution, science has been narrowing the scope of its efforts, focusing on the overarching, though limiting question of truth. Truth as observed and demonstrated through sustained, reproducible results. Increasingly set aside in scientific thought have been questions of a moral or ethical complexion. Questions whose abstract nature disallowed experimental scrutiny. Such questions were better left for magicians or religious charlatans. This scientific disregard for the ethical value of consequences came to a climax during the preparations for the Trinity test, an experiment that produced the first atomic bomb explosion on July 16, 1945. It is common knowledge that its scientists were offering wagers on whether the bomb would ignite the planet's atmosphere. This radical objectivity has created a vacuum in human affairs that is best filled by humanist thought. But humanists have either not rushed in or have not been taken seriously. This is a profit-driven world, and nobody has ever seen a poet use quantum technology to improve financial modeling. But that type of reasoning should not have a prominent place in our collective thinking. I am reminded of the Spanish Stoic philosopher Seneca, who made the distinction between sapientia and sagacitas, that is to say, between wisdom and ingenuity. Ingenuity allowed man to know and control his physical environment, science, while sapientia, wisdom, allowed him to do it with an ethical purpose. For the Roman thinker Cicero, man's ability to know and change his environment should not be separated from dignitas, or dignity, the underlying essence of his moral constitution. Perhaps it is high time that we took a look at our sweltering, battle-scarred, overexploited planet and read the philosophers of the past as they linked human activities with the ethical value of their consequences. We might find that sometimes looking back is the best way to move forward. So how did we get here? As we've been taught since forever, the humanities produced a renaissance and established a foundation for the Enlightenment. But there is a darker side to the humanities that we rarely talk about, which is that in many ways, they put humans at the forefront of creation. That is to say, a place historically reserved for a god. It's not too cheeky to say that humanities replaced the gods with us. So what happened when we pushed the divinity to one side and took his place was that human economic progress, technical advancements, culture, and history could only be understood as products of humanity's efforts, its acumen, and its calculated, productive, and beneficial transformations of its environment. Let's listen to Immanuel Kant when he very plainly consecrates humanity's role in the grand scheme of things. Quote, "Without man and his potential for progress, the whole of reality would be a mere wilderness, a thing in vain and have no purpose." Let's also remember Auguste Comte, who famously proclaimed that a new republic dedicated to the religion of humanity would be inaugurated in 1855. A man who, quote, viewed his grand être as a divinized humanity to replace the corpus mysticum of Christ. On his end, Feuerbach proclaimed that man has his highest being, his God, in himself. Not in himself as an individual, but in his essential nature, his species. Man is a God of man. End quote. Eventually, humanism would have the divinization of humankind as its inevitable consequence. The problem with this new thinking is that it rationalized our troglodyte survival instincts and, concurring with an ever-expanding technological prowess, transformed nature from creation to submissive environment. And unlike creation, environment is not subject to a divinely inspired moral or ethical control that would limit its exploitation. Moreover, with the gods marginalized and the human being brought to the forefront, nature was no longer a god's acreage, to be cherished as divine gift. Setting fire to a forest was no longer a sin against God. It was blameworthy only if no material profit could be gained from it, or if it infringed upon someone else's proprietary entitlements. Therefore, thinkers like Francis Bacon, humanism's bright light cast a dangerous shadow. Growing up in a context of humanist learning, Bacon was motivated by forces in the European mindset that were part of one of the most prodigious tidal waves in cultural history. But he recognized, as he rode its crest, that the tidal wave would have unintended consequences, not only for people, but also for nature. He felt that a way to fix humanity's destructive force was to bring God and the ethical behavior that comes with him back to the forefront. As he wrote in his Novum Organum, only let the human race recover that right over nature which belongs to it by divine bequest. The exercise thereof will be governed by sound reason and true religion. Bacon assumed that common sense would eventually control our violence against nature, and that the continued authority of religion would provide moral control, because while his humanistic reasoning might require anthropocentric concessions from his deity, his faith was still buttressed by an ecological ethic that understood nature as divine creation and not as recklessly exploitable environment. But humanism's unqualified success has outlived religious interdictions that curtail humanity's unrestrained assault on nature. In view of the planet's present condition and based on scientific data, it is evident that humanity's career as planetary landlord is subject to precious few moral checks and balances, and has therefore come with countless adverse effects for every other organism with which it shares the planet. Many objective inquiries into the health of our home in the universe reach the same conclusive verdict. The world cannot be a healthy, balanced habitat if one prolific, powerful, and violent organism prevails over all others. Unfettered by checks and balances, that formidable organism will behave as a pariah, a being that is enduringly harmful and potentially fatal to the biosphere. Remarkably, while so many intellectuals recognize that we are that being, they have yet to identify the solution, perhaps because it involves the disappearance, or at least the protracted and deliberate debilitation of a particular defining essence that makes us who we are. That essence is best illustrated by a fable, which you all know, I'm sure. If the earth were a frog, we'd be the scorpion riding on its back. That's where the frog is singing merrily next to the river, and the scorpion comes by and says, give me a ride to the other side. And I said, well, you're a scorpion. You're going to bite me. No. If I bite you, we both die. So he gives him the ride, and the scorpion bites him, and they both drown. But before he dies, he says, "Why did you bite me?" Well, you knew that we would both perish. I said, "Well, because I'm a scorpion, and that's my nature." So we're behaving like scorpions here on this planet. So can we overcome our nature? Is there a chance that human beings will stop consuming the planet to death? Probably not. It is more likely that as planetary resources dwindle, consumption of what remains will intensify, and competition among nations, groups, and individuals will become even more fierce than it is today. Tribal survival instincts are ingrained in humans, and they predispose us to certain ways of interacting with each other and with the environment. Hundreds of thousands of years of hunting and gathering in forests and savannas have hardwired our brains to function in a distinct manner, worrying about our next meal, making better tools and weapons with which to procure more food, and hoarding as much as possible in anticipation for leaner times. Historically, impediments to the preservation of life have been colossal. Because of this, every action is justified in the endeavor to survive, and this determines the fundamental behavior of every organism on Earth, including us. Evidently, preservation requires consumption, and consumption requires violence to other organisms. Higher levels of violence improve the odds of sustaining life, as the more you kill, the more you eat and stockpile. The fact that we are scorpions, we can see by the spectacular failure of the COP25 Madrid conference and COP26 in Glasgow. Those climate talks are an eloquent statement in this regard. And the title of a recent Times magazine article seems to confirm our inability to change. The world is on track to, quote, the world is on track to generate a record amount of power from coal this year. So what can we do? What can we do as human beings? Well, the obvious obstacle to climate action is tribalism. We humanists, of course, are tribal ourselves. We're human. It is true that today many decrees, directives, and regulations forbid activities that are harmful to society and its environment. Whatever benefits social well-being is considered good, while whatever harms it is considered evil. But the main problem is that societal well-being is understood as a local necessity. Beyond the borders of the imagined community of the tribe, be it a municipality, a state, or a nation, that necessity gradually dissipates. If you live in Dundee, you'll be very concerned about rising waters getting into your garden and spoiling your roses. A bit less concerned about rising waters in another part of Scotland, and even less concerned about rising waters in England, less about rising waters on the European continent. And you might look at Tuvalu, a Pacific nation sinking under the ocean, with pity and sympathy, but without a real immediate concern. As long as our own garden is not underwater, we let scientists worry about that sort of thing. It gives them something to do. The question is, can we expand the scope of the humanist spirit of cooperation to overcome locality and include not just all human groups on the planet, but Earth itself, that self-regulating superorganism that James Lovelock called Gaia. Again, that is improbable, as it requires our own particular tribe to curtail the consumption of resources in favor of people beyond its imagined borders. And more broadly, every tribe's abdication of much of its local control over resources. Nothing short of a benevolent world government could attempt such an impossible endeavor. I'd argue, along with Caroline Levine, in the Activist Humanist, 2023, Princeton University Press, that humanist thought can help us organize ourselves into collective forms that could truly generate meaningful structural change in our political systems. This means that we, quoting, we cannot remain committed to the separation of aesthetic study from the nitty-gritty of political change. End of quote. But there has to be more than this. We must begin to flesh out concepts of cooperative, supranational arrangements that encourage loyalty to something greater than nation or community. That encourage people to think of the planet as their homeland, a sort of Greenpeace on steroids. So what practical applications of humanistic principles will address the climate crisis? Can human extinction be the essential prerequisite for the next edition of the Green Planet? Is there a slim chance that a newfangled spirit of social cooperation will include Gaia, one that underscores the kinship with the non-human as critical to the preservation of human society? The work of researchers in the new field of environmental humanities must be highlighted as a logical guide to the development of an ethos of planetary survival. Researchers must place critical importance on the interdisciplinary cooperation, such as proposed by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology to the Institute by the MacArthur Workshop on Humanistic Studies of the Environment, which was active from 91 to 95, and by Arizona State University's Environmental Humanities Initiative. Significantly, the workshop envisioned a different, more organic role for the humanities. It starts by rising above the dualism that erects a barrier between human beings and everything else on the planet. And realizing that there's nothing truly special about us as a species. We're just more violent than the others. The workshop, in short, diagnoses the Earth's ailments as a result of human beliefs, traditions, principles, and assumptions. And here's where we can change the narrative and we can guide it in a positive direction. Quite belatedly, the humanities had begun to move in the right direction before the workshop launched its efforts. As the humanities became democratized in the movement towards mass education, its scholars have gradually become more engaged in environmental issues and research. This is due in part to scholarly interest and in part in the quest for social relevance. But the problem, as I see it, is that we humanists are not known for our great practical skills. And yet, we have one powerful tool to help avoid, or at least push back, the looming disaster. Think about this. We're involved in generating and analyzing novels, poems, paintings, films, sculpture, theater plays, op-ed pieces. In short, we have jurisdiction over much of the culture that society consumes. And what does this mean? Can we put out fires by drenching them with culture? No, but it means that we control the very influential component of society's perceived moral constitution. We command the narrative through which society looks at itself, the stories that help human beings calculate the ethical value of certain patterns of behavior and collective action. The fact is that the narratives that we control act as a mirror that reflects society's ethical makeup. Such power, when used with an environmentally friendly conscience can have many practical and beneficial outcomes, such as convincing political representatives to pay more attention to the environment or be voted out of office. We need to offset the millions of dollars given, or pounds, given to our politicians by the big polluting companies with the millions of votes from the consumers of our new narrative. I'm done, right? So, just to end, it was only after 1990 that we really began judiciously to agree that our house had been burning since the Industrial Revolution. This is probably too little, too late. Our train to a fiery hell has gained speed, and we can no longer jump off. We've set the planet on fire. The Amazon is being deforested by fire. Considerable areas in every continent are going up in flames. Even water is at the mercy of our fiery self-regard. Cleveland's Cuyahoga River caught fire in 1969, flames reaching 70 feet high. The Chicago and Buffalo rivers and Michigan's Rouge River have also frequently caught fire. In July of 2021, parts of the Gulf of Mexico around the Campeche Sound burst into flames. When you succeed in setting water on fire, flash boiling unsuspecting marine life that was already stuffed with your toxic waste, you should assume that you've probably gone too far and that things are just not looking up for you. That humanist fire that illuminated the mind and freed us from oppressive darkness and ignorance is no longer figurative, and we have nowhere to run. Thank you.
Okay, we've got time for some questions. There's one there.
Hi there. I thought it was a wonderful paper and much needed at this time. I'm Dr. Sherbani, and I want you to reflect on the concept of Donna Haraway's, what she talks about the cyborg, the cybernetic organism, in her much acclaimed essay, Cyborg Manifesto. So post-humanism is an emerging field. We are having a lot of researches on that. It's very much relevant to what you were talking about right now. So how do you think is a cyborg, which is actually playing with and shuffling all the hierarchies in terms of man, woman, man, animal, man, technology, where one becomes part of the other? And this whole concept of cyborg, how could it be a repartee, a rejoinder to the crisis, the kind of crisis that human has created for itself? Could cyborg be a resolution, or could it open some new problems? Or could it be both?
It's probably both, but I think it could probably open up new problems because there is the non-human but still biological, and there's a cyborg which is produced by us. So I think that that would not resolve much. And who would be at the top? See, that's a question. If something we produce is at the top, I don't think anything's going to change. The only big change, and as I was reading Jill Levine and these people, is that, and they all agree, that we're not really destroying the planet. We're destroying our ability to survive in the planet. So once that ability is gone and we are gone, the planet will take a few million years and it will be green again. So the problem is us, is our problem. The planet will survive without us. But biologically, every other species will do much better without us here. There's also, I'm sorry if I can, there's also a train of thought that we are sort of an infection on the planet. And that things like Ebola, COVID, things like that are the planet's way of it's a vaccine, trying to get rid of us as an infection. Malaria, all of these things, which, when I first read about that, I thought doesn't make a lot of sense. But after reading more deeply into it, maybe it's true. Maybe Gaia, like Lovelock says, is one huge organism. We don't see it as an organism because we're a little part of it, but it reacts like us. I mean, when we get a cold, we try to get rid of it. When Gaia gets an illness like humanity, it tries to get rid of us.
There's a question here, Alfonso.
I present to you two propositions. One is about rethinking our relationship with the structures we have put in place, where we have institutions, bureaucracies, and systems that have clearly failed us, but we've identified those systems as the only operational systems to govern ourselves, being one. And the second one being this single point of utility logic that we have, which we have gone past, where you mentioned, control over resource. We have to, in many ways, reimagine our, not just a human, relationship with resource and its ownership. I mean, examples like property law and things like that, we are designed in the last 400 years to object, subject, others and other things, and then there's consumption and ownership. Do we need to re-navigate our relationship as shared agents of use rather than single point use of utility?
Well, here's a big problem, and I hope I can answer both questions with one answer. A question was posed to a prominent activist. I forget his name right now. What would the Earth look like if all your propositions were put into practice? What would the United States look like? And he took a while to talk about it, and he says the United States would look like a very poor third world nation. So here's the big problem. Not just with our institutions, it's the way we consume that are institutionalized. So what if somebody tells you, well, you can't have a car? You can't have 2 televisions. You can't eat so much. And that is institutionalized. You would have a revolution in 20 minutes. So the big problem is us, the way we consume as individuals and as society. That is, we will not let anyone take that away from us. And somebody said, maybe Marx, that any society is 3 meals away from revolution. Well, it would be a chaos. So that's why I said that probabilities to actually fix this are very, very slim. And that's part of my depressing all of you today.
We have two questions that I'm going to take. Please ask the questions quickly and then quick responses.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. And could you clarify whether we should assume that everyone embodies traits similar to the scorpion? And it seems to me that the darker aspects of humanity are deeply rooted in metaphysical knowledge and the dichotomy between humans and nature. However, how does this perspective account for cultures such dichotomies? For instance, Zen Buddhism in Japan and Confucianism in China promote harmony and reverence for nature. And how do these philosophies fit into this discussion?
Yes, thank you for the question. The one thing that's being addressed is that dichotomy by just about anybody that is looking at this problem, because the problem is really anchored in the fact that we believe that we are not part of nature. We are above nature. We are better than every other animal on the planet. So once you assume that, everything is up for grabs. You can do whatever you want. Buddhism is a good example of letting go of that dichotomy. I'm part of nature. I'm not fighting nature. I'm part of it. Can we all become Buddhists and just drop our cars and things like that? That's the problem. It's not going to happen. If we could, if Buddhists are not the end all of all this, because I've known Buddhists that have 2 cars, but
Japanese have quite a lot of cars.
and the Japanese they have 3.
There's
But it's a good idea that if we could all have that mindset, it would help quite a bit.
This is the last question, and then 30 seconds to answer.
Okay, thank you. In addressing the challenge of climate change, in your abstract, science pretty sure plays the pivotal roles in understanding and mitigating climate change. But how about the character education, sir? Because based on my experience, teaching students become competent relatively easier than teaching students become good. Do you have any recommendation how to teach students in terms of character education?
Character.
Yeah.
Don
you.
was talking about that yesterday, that some universities are sort of echo chambers. You know, what happens here has no incidence on the outside. And that's a very good question, because I remember as a child, every morning there was a big American flag there, and you would say, "I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all." And we could, talk about that and all the lies it has in it, but that's a problem. That's a mindset that's created. I am a member of this nation. But whatever I do has to help this nation. The other people, who cares, right? The nation is a big problem. The concept of the nation, where you go out and fight other people. So we have to educate kids that, okay, the nation has its good parts, but it's not the end all of everything. So try to think of yourself as a citizen of the planet, right? Not just of here, of this nation. And the United States is not the only one that does this, by the way, because look at the soccer games. I mean, people are killing each other because their team beat the other guy and the other guy beat him. You know, it's old nationalism, and nationalism is one of the worst scourges of modern society. So we have to teach kids from, and I don't know how they're going to do that, because this is ingrained, the concept of nationality, but you have to teach them that, look, okay, you're from here, but you could also be from there. Or you could be from the United States and move to Japan and love it over there. So what's all this thing about I pledge allegiance to this? What is that all about? It makes no sense.